This is me. It's January 2000, I'm 9 years old, and I am dressed up, to the best of my abilities, as Link from The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. See, I've even got the Megaton hammer. Oh, and this is my little sister Ailish dressed up as a fairy, which doesn't really work canonically, but she was 3 at the time, and hey, I'm using a cushion for a shield, so let's just use our imagination here, shall we? The reason I'm dressed as Link is because I, like many others around that time, was obsessed with the Nintendo 64 masterpiece, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. This, along with many Zelda games that followed right up to Breath of the Wild, not only provided some of my fondest memories as a child and as an adult, but most importantly, and what I'd like to talk about in this video, is how The Legend of Zelda helped to form the values that have shaped me into the person that I am today. Oh, and before I forget, couple spoilers for these games. It's the late 90s, and after graduating from our old Sega Mega Drive, or Sega Genesis as it's known in the States, my parents got us a Nintendo 64. We played Mario Kart and GoldenEye and reveled in the fun 3D multiplayer action. Even my dad sunk several hours into GoldenEye because it's kind of the GOAT first-person shooter. So anyway, one day my dad came home with a game that a young guy that he worked with purchased but couldn't get into. I thought it looked really cool because the cartridge was this vibrant gold color. I was very keen to play it. I don't exactly remember the moment that I became hooked in it, but I would say it was within the first few minutes of playing it. The characters, the mystery, the colors, the danger, the mythology, the music, oh my god, the music. It all combined together and transported me to a new world in a way that no other video game had before and wouldn't again for many years. My older brother didn't vibe with this game and my younger sister was too little, so it became my game, it became my adventure. Around this time in my life, I only had one real friend. His name was Steven, and what brought us together in the first place was that he also played Zelda and had even finished the game. This was the year 2000, and the internet was in its infancy, so I didn't even know that game walkthroughs existed. This meant that I became utterly dependent on Steven, not just because I literally had no one else, but because every time I got stuck in a dungeon or didn't know where to go next, I would call up his house with our landline phone and ask him for help. I mean, you kids, you don't know how good you've got it, I tell you. Despite my friendship with Steven, I was also bullied quite a bit back then and found myself getting absorbed into another world of magic and fantasy. It was a time when the worlds of Hyrule and Hogwarts were my only places of refuge. They provided an escape where instead of being the lonely, misunderstood boy that I was, I could be the lonely, misunderstood fairy boy who, sword in hand, bravely fought off monsters and became the hero of time. Or I could be the lonely, misunderstood wizard boy who, wand in hand, bravely fought off Voldemort and became the boy who lived. Because wow, even though I had no friends, pop culture representation for a boy like me at the time was sky high. But where Harry Potter was a book, and books are supposed to take you to another world, you're meant to get attached to the characters and the story, Zelda was a video game, and up until this point, video games were missions, races, and levels, point A to point B achievements with cool graphics. But something about this particular video game was different. This game taught me life lessons. It taught me to value curiosity and to not just take everything in front of me at face value. It taught me to love and seek out exploration and adventure, something that has stuck with me right up to today. You jump back and forth 7 years in this game, going from child to adult, which also taught me that time itself is precious and a lot will change in 7 years, so make the most of what's given to you. It also taught me that Link is painfully slow. Come on. By the time I was ready to defeat the final boss, Ganon, I was so emotionally invested in the story, it felt more high stakes than almost anything else in my life. And when I finally did, when I struck that beast with the final blow of my Master Sword and the credits started to roll with the charming Lost Woods music playing in the background, I felt so sad. So unexpectedly sad, and I couldn't process why. This game that had taken up such a meaningful chunk of my life was over. Months of playing and fighting and problem solving, and suddenly the story was finished and there was nothing else to be done. I had nothing else to compare this feeling to. This wasn't just some 2-hour movie or some TV show.
Well, excuse me, princess.
And remember, at that time, TV was basically just like episodic. There was nothing serialized, well, except for Pokemon. That show has some serious story arcs.
We've gone so far and done so much.
I also remember feeling angry that it wouldn't actually let me finish the game. What I mean is, in Ocarina of Time, and essentially every Zelda game, is that once you finish the final boss, there's no way to save it and live in the peaceful world of Hyrule, having rescued the princess and becoming the hero. No, the credits finish and you just had to turn off your system or reset it. I remember letting the TV just hold on that final end screen for half an hour before I gave up and accepted that there was no post-Ganon Hyrule to play around in. But in a way, this taught me a valuable lesson in itself. That in life, there is no permanent happy ending. That even when you succeed, there will always be another challenge waiting for you around the corner. I went on to play the side quests and collect the Golden Skull tools just to get as much out of the game as possible. And once I got to secondary school, making friends didn't become any easier, but through a love of Zelda, I did once again manage to make one good friend, Roman. We bonded over Ocarina of Time by having races to see who could beat the main story first. At the tough Catholic all-boys school that I attended, this friendship was one of the few things I could take solace in. So Roman, wherever you are, man, thank you. During this time, 2 other mainline Zelda games were released. The first one was The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, a quasi-sequel of Ocarina of Time, a fun yet darker game than its predecessor, which I played and enjoyed but didn't connect with as much as Ocarina and never actually completed as a child. Then there was of course Wind Waker, but I didn't have a GameCube and so missed out on it entirely. And while now I know that the Wind Waker is one of the most celebrated Zelda games of all time, when it came out I remember thinking that the art style looked childish and cartoony, which was not what I wanted for my next Zelda adventure. I wanted a grown-up Zelda game with an older Link to reflect my, I suppose, moodier, more serious teenage years. And then 4 days after my 16th birthday, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess was released on the brand new Nintendo Wii console. After countless playthroughs of Ocarina of Time, I was ready for something new. Twilight Princess seemed to be exactly what I was after. It had an adult Link, and the whole design reflected the general dark and gritty aesthetic that would come to define much of the media from the mid to late 2000s. From Christopher Nolan's Batman series to the Harry Potter movies, using a color palette of seemingly nothing but green, brown, and grey. Yeah, the gritty overhaul was in full effect. Twilight Princess is highly praised for the same reason it's often criticized, that it's seen as a rehash of Ocarina of Time. From the story to the dungeons, the music, and even the final battle with Ganondorf, so much of what makes Twilight Princess familiar and nostalgic are elements that can be found in Ocarina of Time, which I realized was exactly what I needed. I was also realizing that high school was turning out to be not much better than primary school. I had very few friends and began to feel a strange disconnect between me and my peers, many of whom were going to parties, trying out new experiences, dating, whereas I was not yet ready to give up on the innocence and simple pleasures of childhood. That's why having a newly released Zelda game couldn't have come at a better moment. It was an excuse to feel nostalgic for my childhood again, a way to return to that magical time I spent as a kid. It was an escape from the harsh realities of growing up. And although there was a lot of Ocarina of Time in Twilight Princess, there were also a lot of new elements, from the more robust story to the almost gothic design and inventive gameplay with the Wii remote. I loved it. Despite all this, I only played it through once. I just never felt that same deep emotional connection to it that I had with Ocarina of Time. I figured it was because I was older now, and perhaps my expectations were too impossibly high to live up to that truly magical feeling of my first Zelda game. Fast forward 5 years into the future. I'm about to turn 21 and I'm finishing up my second year of university. Personally, at this point in my life, I had never been happier or more emotionally fulfilled. I had a large, close group of friends from my performing arts course. I was experiencing new, exciting things all the time. I was fully out of my shell and brimming with confidence, wanderlust, and happiness. It was around this time that The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword was released. Despite being keen to begin my next Zelda adventure, when I finally sat down to play it, I realized I was nowhere near as excited as I thought I would be. See, the thing was, I had previously played Zelda games as a form of escape. They were a way to forget about the troubles and anxieties of my childhood and adolescence. And when you're that age, there really isn't a lot else going on that interests you. When Skyward Sword came out, however, it was a completely different story. Between uni assignments, parties, work, theatre rehearsals, and dating, I couldn't seem to factor in video games. I suddenly became aware that I hadn't played my Nintendo Switch in well over a year, and now that a new Zelda game had come out, I wondered how I would fit it in. All that considered, I started playing through the game, but I actually only completed the first 2 dungeons or so before I just lost interest. It was enjoyable, but not captivating. After Twilight Princess, I had already come to accept that the magical feeling of escapism that I got from Ocarina of Time was unique to a particular period in my life. And now there was nothing in my life that I needed to escape from. In fact, I had such a lust for life that every time I sat down to play Skyward Sword, I felt like I was missing out on something else more fun and interesting. That detached feeling continued when the Wii U came out. For the first time in my life, I wasn't excited about the new Nintendo console. Even 3 years later, as I approached my mid-20s, when Nintendo announced a new Zelda game for Wii U, I didn't bother getting excited about it, especially when I already had an unfinished Zelda game collecting dust. I had come to the conclusion that perhaps I had just grown out of video games. And then finally, in October of 2016, a trailer for yet another new console was released, the Nintendo Switch. It looked like what the Wii U was always supposed to be, a seamless handheld to TV playing experience with a sleek new design. Despite it looking much more accomplished than the Wii U, I knew where I stood with video games and wasn't about to rush out to buy one the minute it was released. Although the more I saw of the Switch, the more impressed with it I was. But then the long-awaited trailer dropped for the now very delayed The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It actually looked like something different, and because I had a feeling that it was a game I may actually want to play in the future, I decided I was finally going to finish Skyward Sword. It had been 4 years since I last played it, and as a completionist, I knew it wouldn't feel right starting a new Zelda game with a conclusion to Skyward Sword left incomplete. So somewhere in early 2017, I popped it in and started playing where I had left off all those years ago. I enjoyed my playthrough of it and admired the incredible dungeon design and loved learning about the origin of the Master Sword and how this game establishes the Kingdom of Hyrule. But I really got to a point where I just wanted to finish the damn thing. Towards the end of the game, I remember it feeling really repetitive, like why did I need to kill this motherfucker so many times? I finally finished the game in July of 2017 and was pretty happy to be done with it. People at my work, my little sister, they'd all started playing Breath of the Wild and were loving it, but I needed a break. By now, I was starting to feel some pretty intense burnout in my life. I had completed university years ago, and now I was 26 and working 2 average jobs with barely any time off. I just wasn't exactly where I thought I'd be at this point in my life. I was feeling directionless and a bit lost. I wanted to make time for things that made me happy. So I ended up quitting one of the jobs so that I could spend more time with my girlfriend Lauren and settle into the apartment that we had just moved into. And then 1 month later, things started getting worse. The first thing that happened was my family dog, Missy, died from heart failure. She was 13, so it was never fully unexpected that something like that could happen, but it was still awful, as losing one's pet always is. And then just 1 week later, my nana, who had been ailing for the last few years, died in her sleep. It was like 2 incredibly important mainstays in my life, 2 symbolic figures of my childhood were just gone. It was a pretty rough time. Oh yeah, and the world was sort of turning to shit, but that was something we were all going through. It was during that mourning process that I looked up and suddenly knew what I needed to do. I suggested to Lauren that we buy a Nintendo Switch as a way to distract us from all these crappy events. She said of course, and the next day I was sitting in front of my TV to play, for the very first time and with 0 expectations, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It seemed to begin like any other Zelda game. Link wakes up from some long sleep, you walk through, open a chest, smash open a box. But then, as I ran towards the light out of the Shrine of Resurrection and looked out over the gorgeous new Hyrule with the twinkling piano keys and dazzling morning light intertwining with the peaceful chirping of the birds, something stirred inside of me. I could see, was that Death Mountain in the distance? And oh man, look how the light is hitting these individual blades of grass. Each minute I played of this game, I found something new to be excited and impressed by. I could jump! Nearly 20 years of playing Zelda and Link can jump for the first time at the press of a button. You don't collect hearts, you eat food? You can climb anything? Weapons were not attained incrementally after completing dungeons, but just found and broken a little while later. Link's wearing blue and not green? I will never forget the feeling of realizing that the Great Plateau map wasn't the whole map of Hyrule. You mean to tell me that this area that's bigger than the Ocarina of Time's entire world is only the tutorial zone? And the tutorial wasn't herding goats, but these cool shrines where you'd learn an insane physics bending skill? It blew my mind. I would look around to the mountains and landmarks in the distance, and it dawned on me that I could reach all of those areas whenever I wanted. Nothing was out of bounds. I could go from the desert to the forest to the snow to the inside of someone's home in a tiny beach village, and it would never have to stop to load the next area. What was this game I was playing? These simple yet groundbreaking changes to the Zelda formula got me fully absorbed into the world. I would look at the time and like 3 hours had gone by in an instant. I didn't understand how after basically forcing myself to finish Skyward Sword, I was effortlessly addicted to Breath of the Wild. It was only after I had accepted that I'd never feel that childlike wonder from playing a Zelda game that it returned in full effect and I felt like a kid again. For the first time since I was a 9-year-old boy, Zelda was a truly magical escape. And this time Hyrule was a massive playground that was beyond anything I could have dreamt of as a child. It reminded me of playing Grand Theft Auto in its vast, urban, open world, but instead of shooting things and driving cars in fake New York City, I was quietly exploring the fields, mountains, and deserts of Hyrule. I felt overwhelmed with excitement and wonder. Even the music was different. I love the sweeping, heroic music of each Hyrule Field theme in every Zelda game. It makes you feel like you're on a mission and that the whole world is counting on you. But in Breath of the Wild, you have these gentle piano flourishes that chime in at random times as you play, creating a calming, atonal ambience. What your ears start tuning into instead are the sounds of a flock of birds when taking flight, or the buzzing of nearby insects, or even just a tender gust of wind blowing across the grass. It's so incredibly peaceful. I highly recommend the video on Breath of the Wild's invisible sound design by Scruffy if you want to learn more about this. Also Writing on Games video on the importance of Breath of the Wild's empty space. The gentle, atonal music and gorgeous nature soundscapes encouraged me to take my time and explore the world around me. Sure, there was a main story to complete, but it seemed secondary to the innate feeling of exploration each time I played. And even when I was attempting a quest from the main story, I loved that I could attack it from whatever angle seemed to make sense for me, which was a terrific lesson as an artist, that there's no one perfect way to go about something, that you should utilize your skills and experience to complete it in a way that makes sense to you. But most of the time, I would just want to explore. I'd be heading out to one area, but then I'd get distracted by some glowing light in the distance and I'd want to go and check that out. This non-linear way of playing the game, where I could take my time and not constantly worry about what I was supposed to be doing, was a lesson that I found very valuable and also practical in my everyday life. Particularly at my age, where there's often this pressure to find your career, buy a home, and all the other conventional norms of being in your 20s, Breath of the Wild taught me that I could carve out my own non-linear path, straight from the main quest of my own life, and instead explore the exciting things happening around me. And that's exactly what I did. Instead of working full-time, I cut my hours down to 4 days a week so that I can spend more time on creative endeavors, like making videos, which has definitely made me a more balanced, happier person. Not only was the spark of exploration and adventure that was kindled by my first playthrough of Ocarina of Time then reignited when I played Breath of the Wild, I also developed a further appreciation of nature in general. With its gorgeous depictions of forests, autumnal valleys, vast wetlands, tropical jungles, and many other beautiful biomes, I suddenly just wanted to go out and be amongst the natural world. And so the following March, Lauren and I travelled to Japan, where we climbed mountains, visited moss gardens, wandered through forests, and visited beautiful islands with tiny populations. I saw firsthand how, despite being a densely populated country, Japan has a deep respect for its nature and places huge importance on harmonizing their culture with the natural world. Wandering through the peaceful hills and forests, I found myself reflecting on Shigeru Miyamoto's inspiration for The Legend of Zelda in the first place. Miyamoto, who is the genius creator of the Zelda series and also Mario, said he was inspired by his adventures as a child, exploring the various hillsides, forests, and caves in his hometown near Kyoto. Remembering this about Miyamoto caused me to reflect on the Legend of Zelda series as a whole, and how with each game it's helped me to discover more about myself and been the ultimate comfort in difficult times. From being a child and igniting in me a sense of adventure, curiosity, and a need to be brave when times were tough, to helping me feel less alone through my adolescence, to being an adult and remembering that there is no one path to take in life that will lead to success and happiness. To me, maintaining the imagination and wonder one feels as a child is the key to leading a fulfilling life as an adult. The Legend of Zelda serves as a reminder of that magical, childlike feeling, and it's why the series is and will always remain a constant in my life. Hey, thanks for sticking with me on this one. I know it was a bit of a different video than what I usually post, but this is a pretty new channel and I've got lots of different video ideas, so please like the video if you did enjoy it and hit subscribe because it really does help out the channel and you'll be able to see more of my stuff in future. And let me know in the comments if you grew up playing Zelda and what it means to you, which Zelda game was your favorite. Alright, thanks again for watching and I'll see you in the next one.